I welded 3 floors of structural steel in just a day and a half. The foreman promised me 50,000 rubles right in front of witnesses, a massive sum for a weekend gig back then, worth about $1,500. But when I came down from the scaffolding to collect, he had a completely different number in mind. What happened next almost ended in a bloodbath. And looking back, the exact moment I refused 20,000 rubles that were legally mine was the moment that probably saved my life. Watch until the end, because in the criminal underworld of the Moscow suburbs, every trap has a delayed fuse. In the early 2000s, a handshake in Russia was supposed to mean something. But on those gritty construction sites, I quickly learned a brutal truth. A man only keeps his word if he had already decided to honor it before meeting you. If he didn't, no amount of logic or witnesses would change the outcome. The only thing that changed outcomes was fear. It started on a Friday evening. A foreman named Dima came to my site from another project. He told me he had a side hustle for the weekend. Same work I was already doing, heavy structural welding, just at a different location. When I asked about the pay, he dropped the ultimate red flag. We'll figure it out on site. In the construction world, that phrase is a psychological trap. It means, I'll tell you the real price only after you've committed your time, scrambled your plans, and have no easy way to walk away. When we arrived, the situation was clear. The local welders were hopelessly behind. But they weren't slow because they lacked skill. They were slow because they had calculated exactly how much effort their fixed 30,000 ruble monthly salary required. Why kill yourself when the concrete pours will cover the welds anyway? Dima looked at me desperately and said, if you fully weld all 3 floors from Friday to Monday, I will pay you 50,000 rubles. I looked him dead in the eye and said, Dima, that's too much money. You're lying to me. Give me a real number and I'll give you a straight yes or no. But he swore on everything he had. 50,000, solid. I wasn't stupid. I told him to wait and I walked over to the local welders during their smoke break. They looked at me, a non-Slavic worker asking for their blessing. I asked out of respect if taking this weekend shift would hurt their standing or their pay. They shrugged and smiled. Go for it, brother. It actually helps us out and we get our fixed money either way. I turned back to Dima and demanded, repeat the number so they can hear it. Dima loudly repeated, 50,000. The welders raised their eyebrows in disbelief. I added one condition, and if I don't finish by Monday morning, you pay me absolutely nothing. Deal. We shook hands. The trap was set, but I thought I was the hunter. I fired up my welding arc at 6 p.m. that Friday. Dima left, promising to pick me up at 10 to take me back to the dorms. I worked like a demon. Dima had told me to just do the main joints and leave the rest on basic tack welds since it would all be buried in concrete. But I have a curse. I physically cannot leave a job half done. It's how I was trained. If my weld isn't flawless, I feel a deep sense of shame. By 9 p.m., I had completely finished the entire first floor, chipped the slag, painted the joints, and dragged my heavy cables up to the second level. When Dima arrived at 10 and saw the sheer volume of completed work, his jaw dropped. He told me his plans changed. He had to take me back to the dorms, but he had already cleared my schedule with my main foreman for Saturday. By Saturday at noon, the entire job was finished. All 3 floors, fully welded, cleaned, and painted. A 3-day high-intensity job completed in just a day and a half. I packed my tools and sat down to eat lunch, deciding not to call Dima right away. While waiting, I ran into a crew of roofers led by a guy named Zhenya. It was a tiny 3-man team, but they moved fast. We started talking, and they casually dropped a bombshell. We don't even step onto a roof for less than 200,000 to 300,000 rubles. That hit me hard. It was my first real look into the dark hierarchy of the Russian construction boom, the massive, unforgiving ocean between what the system paid migrant labor and what it paid locals who had the right to negotiate. It felt like 2 entirely different countries operating on the exact same scaffold. Right then, Dima's car pulled up. As it turned out, he had sneaked in quietly and was secretly listening to our conversation before pretending he had just arrived. I showed him the flawless work and said, "Everything is done. Let's settle up. 50,000. And instantly, Dima transformed. The confident, generous foreman was gone. In his place stood a man desperately scrambling for a reason to cheat me. He looked at the floors and muttered, "Look, 50,000 for a day and a half of work is just too much. If we break it down by the hour, it doesn't make sense." A cold rage washed over me. I stood up and laid out 4 points. First, I didn't demand this money, you named the price yourself. Second, you gave your word publicly in front of witnesses with a penalty that I accepted and I didn't fail. Third, if we don't settle this right here, I will get my money from you one way or another. On that third point I paused and he flinched. He knew exactly what I meant. Months earlier, a twist of fate had introduced me to Alexander, a local mafia boss, a genuine criminal authority who traveled with a full security detail. Alexander had taken a liking to me and told me, "If anyone in this oblast ever cheats you and you are in the right, call me directly. I will handle it." Then I gave Dima my fourth point. If you want, I won't call anyone. If you want to buy yourself a conscience for 50,000 rubles, keep it, choke on it. The word conscience hit Dima like a physical blow. He lunged toward me. I stepped right into his face. Inside, I knew I would probably lose a fistfight with him. But worse than that, I knew the unspoken rules of the territory. A migrant worker fighting a local foreman in the Moscow suburbs in 2003. The police wouldn't ask questions. There was only one version of that story, and it ended with me in a cell or a ditch. Zhenya, the roofing foreman, stepped directly between us. He broke us apart, called a taxi for me, and told me to get out of there. During the entire ride back, my hand was shaking, hovering over the phone to call Alexander, but I forced myself to stop. I realized that calling a gangster is a door you can never unopen. Once you use mafia protection to solve a wage dispute, they own a piece of you forever. I had seen the price people paid for that kind of help, and I refused to pay it. I went asleep angry. On Sunday, I hoped to just rest, but the universe had other plans. A black Mercedes pulled up to my dormitory. Out stepped Alexander himself. He smiled and said he was just driving by and realized he needed me to finish reinforcing a steel canopy at his private property, a job I had turned down before. True respect isn't about flashing weapons, it's about actions. This man could have sent his enforcers to drag me out of bed. Instead, he came to a crowded dorm room personally. Who was he and who was I? We went to his estate. I fired up the torch, fixed the structural weak points, and by evening we were sitting in his garden gazebo. Out came the vodka, the heavy food. Alexander told me, "You did a beautiful job today, drink up." I hate drinking, but refusing a man like him felt like a death wish, so I drank. As we spoke, he looked at me sharply and said, "Remember, if you have trouble in this region, call me. We, the old-school authorities, made a pact. We don't allow honest workers to get scammed. It's against the code." He could tell by my eyes that I was hiding something. He started pressing for details, but even half drunk, I kept my mouth shut about Dima. I didn't want a bloodbath. Alexander stared at me for a long time, then sighed, "Fine. If you don't want to talk, don't. Just don't regret it later." He put me in his car, handed me a bottle of vodka, and shoved 10,000 rubles into my pocket. When I told him it was way too much for a few hours of work, he snapped, "Take it while people are giving it. Always take what people offer when they value your labor." A few days later, Zhenya the roofer tracked me down. "Come join my crew," he said. "One of my guys vanished. We can't handle the volume. I'll teach you the trade." When I asked about the money, he promised around 100,000 rubles a month. But I was smarter now. I told him, "Zhenya, you're not going to pay me 100,000. Let's be real. If you pay me the equivalent of $1,500 flat, which was about 45,000 rubles back then, I'm in." Zhenya was stunned by my bluntness, but he agreed. My old foreman told me I was insane to leave. warning me that the roofers would ruin me. I didn't listen, and eventually I would regret it. But at that moment I was on top of the world, literally on a roof, carrying heavy rolls of waterproofing material and mastering a gas torch. The roofing crew enjoyed total freedom. We worked when it was sunny and we rested when it rained. But the ugly side of Zhenya showed up within the very first week. On the third day, the weather turned terrible and Zhenya helped me move into a new dormitory, one that was strictly Slavic. That night, a heavy drinking session began. There were 3 of us. As long as we were buying alcohol using my 10,000 rubles from Alexander, everything was perfect. We were brothers. But the moment my cash ran out and I asked Zhenya to advance some money from the crew's shared fund for the next round, he pulled out a little notebook. He meticulously wrote down my name and the exact amount I was borrowing. I stopped him immediately. Zhenya, we drank my 10,000 together as a team. Why did my money belong to everyone, but now you're writing down a personal debt against my future wages? The third guy, Sania, instantly took Zhenya's side. Right then, I quietly put a cross over this crew. I looked at them and said, "Fine. We finish this specific contract, you pay me my $1,500, and I am done with you." I refused to drink with them again, even though they kept partying for 4 more days while the rain held up the work. During those empty days, I decided I wanted to visit my old dormitory, the place where I had slept on the bare floor for 45 days, just to see my old friends. But when I called, I found out something horrifying. A few nights prior, a drunk local man at the train station had started shouting racial slurs at some migrant workers. They lost their temper and beat him up. It was a standard, stupid street fight. But the man's wife found him, panicked, and complained to the neighbors. A massive mob of locals armed with iron bars, baseball bats, and construction reinforcement steel gathered in the dead of night. They stormed my old dormitory and unleashed a brutal, coordinated massacre. They beat every single non-Slavic face they could find, shouting that we needed to know our place. Nobody was killed, but dozens were left crippled in the hospital. The entire dormitory emptied out and vanished within 48 hours. I sat in my room, completely numb. A chill ran down my spine. The Creator had saved me. If I hadn't taken the roofing job and moved out when I did, I would have been lying on that floor, getting my skull crushed by an iron bar. That event broke something inside me. I became consumed by thoughts of survival and paranoia. I stopped leaving my room unless it was for work, terrified of running into skinheads or angry mobs. The open hostility was growing everywhere. Strangers would look at you on the street and say, "Why did you come here? Go back to your mud village." It was deeply humiliating. Not long ago, we were all citizens of the same massive country, part of one family, and suddenly, human psychology shifted. If you weren't local, you were subhuman. I was a certified high-grade welder, yet I was paid 12,000 rubles while my local partner got 30,000 for the exact same shifts, and I was doing his assembly work for him. You just had to swallow your pride and keep moving because, thankfully, good people still existed too. My own welding partner used to scream at the management demanding to know why my pay was being docked, while the foreman just looked at the floor, pretending his hands were tied. Then out of nowhere, Dima showed up at our roofing site. He stood on the ground and called me down from the roof. I climbed down and asked what he wanted. He reached into his pocket and handed me 20,000 rubles. "Here," he said, avoiding eye contact. "I thought about it and you deserved this for the weekend work." I looked at the cash and I refused to touch it. I told him, "I already forgot about that money. I don't want it, because I know exactly how this works. If I take this 20,000 now, you'll convince me to come to your next big project and there you will scam me for 100,000. I'd rather cut ties with you forever right here." He tried to argue, claiming he had a massive, high-paying contract lined up for me, but I turned my back on him and climbed back up the ladder. That evening, Dima came back to convince me again. I told him I was too busy and that Zhenya wouldn't let me leave the crew anyway. Zhenya walked over, and the two foremen stepped aside to talk. A few minutes later, Zhenya walked back and told me we were putting the roof on hold. We were all going to work on Dima's new project as a full crew. When we were alone, Zhenya asked me, "Why did you refuse the 20,000 earlier?" I told him the truth. "Because it's a bait. It's a psychological anchor to drag me into a bigger trap. But you're the boss, you agreed to work with him, and I'm in your crew, so I'll go. But I wouldn't have touched it myself." And guess what? Dima scammed Zhenya too. When the project ended, Dima paid the roofing crew significantly less than their agreed-upon rate. It wasn't my business, so I didn't ask for details, but I personally received 15,000 rubles for 2 days of welding. To me, that was an incredible amount of money. To Zhenya, it was barely enough for a single dinner at a nice restaurant. Suddenly, Zhenya looked at me and said, "By the way, Dima also gave me that 20,000 rubles you refused earlier. But don't worry, we'll split it fairly among the crew." I burst out laughing. "Fairly? I told you I renounced that money. It doesn't exist to me. Go ahead and split it with Sania." Sania, showing some unexpected pride, spoke up. "No, that's not right. That money belongs to you by law. I don't want it. But hey, we could use it to buy alcohol for the whole crew." "No, Sania," I thought to myself, "you are definitely not a good guy." Out loud, I just said, "Do whatever you want, it's not my problem. I am not drinking." Zhenya took the money and left. That evening, he came back to the dorm acting incredibly strange, looking paranoid. He pulled me into a corner and started interrogating me. "How do you know the mafia boss, Alexander? Why didn't you tell me what Dima did to you over the weekend?" I looked at him confused. "Why do you care? I negotiated badly with Dima. That was my own mistake. Why would I run and cry to Alexander if it was my own fault?" Zhenya looked at me like I was insane. "Dima robs you and you blame yourself." I told him it was in the past and it didn't matter anymore. But then the terrifying truth came out. It turned out that Zhenya had personally gone behind my back, tracked down Alexander, and told him that Dima had scammed his favorite welder out of 50,000 rubles. The conversation between the mafia boss and the foreman must have been terrifying, because 2 days later, Dima practically burst into our room, pale as a ghost, trembling, and forced me to take 30,000 rubles. He kept repeating, "Here, I gave 20,000 to Zhenya, here is the remaining 30. We are completely even now. Please." I took the cash and told him, "I never saw the 20,000 you gave Zhenya, but if anyone asks," meaning Alexander, "I will tell them I was paid in full." As I spoke to Dima, I looked closely at his face and my blood ran cold. In his eyes there was a deep, venomous, calculating hatred. He knew he had been publicly humiliated and forced to pay by the mafia, and in his mind it was entirely my fault. A man who betrays you and gets caught will never blame himself. He will always blame the victim for the consequences. I realized with absolute certainty. He was going to wait for the perfect moment, and he was going to destroy me. I made my decision right there. Bastard. I had to pack my bags and flee the region immediately before Dima found his chance to settle the score. Luckily, an excuse presented itself right away. When it came time for our final payout, Zhenya didn't pay me the full $1,500 he had promised. It wasn't because he didn't want to, he was terrified of Alexander, but because we hadn't finished the entire volume of roofing work due to the weather. I knew he had taken care of his own pocket, but he had lied about the contract prices, telling me and Sania one number while collecting a much bigger check from the client. But that lie was exactly what I needed. It completely freed me from my moral obligation. Our initial handshake agreement was crystal clear. If the payout fell below the promised amount, I had every right to walk away instantly. Zhenya looked at me as I packed my things, and he realized I had kept that specific clause in my mind the entire time, just waiting for this exact moment. I had completely different plans for my life anyway, and this final betrayal gave me the perfect, clean exit. I took my money, walked out the door, and never looked back.